Today we're talking with Marine veteran Dr. Keith McNally, and we're going to talk about walking the path. But before we do that, Keith, take us back and tell us what you did in the Marine Corps.
That is many, many moons ago, but I appreciate you bringing it up. So I joined the Corps right after high school. The conversation with my dad was, well, he was, a Navy veteran. And I said, well, I'm just going to go one up on you. So I joined the Corps. At 18, I was living in Florida with my dad at the time. And, was part of the delayed, what they called the delayed entry. I'm not quite sure if that's still a thing now, but
Yeah.
delayed entry program. I actually, my first day as was a boot. I was about to say a recruit. Anyway, it was in November 11th, 1987. And so it's
Nice.
been quite some time. Was a mortarman. I actually joined in the late 80s. Rambo was a thing. And so I grew up with that kind of persona to kind
Mhm.
of emulate. And so I thought, well, going in as a Marine would be a good thing. And then being an infantryman would also be a good thing.
Absolutely. So, talk a little bit about being in the infantry. What, uh, you know, did it live up to your expectations?
Well, I want to say yes, but there's two sides of that coin. It really didn't. I was expecting it to be a whole lot, well, especially boot camp, a whole lot rougher, tougher, harder to kind of make it through. I was really expecting this whole kind of transformation to be, this wow kind of thing.
Hmm.
And I think for some people it was, for some men and for women who joined, it probably was. Um, for me, I don't know, not so much. And, maybe that was because of where I was in life at the time. But, going in, joining the Corps, doing my, boot camp experience, being trained as an infantryman and specifically in mortars, and then going into the fleets, um, you're kind of expecting this. I'm always thinking back to, a few good men, the Marines want you, or with the Army, this is again back in the day, the Army commercials where we do more between, before 9 a.m. than most people do all day. So I'm thinking this is going to be like this very regimented, rigid training that continues on and on. They're going to develop me as as an expert rifleman and all this kind of stuff. And it wasn't really like that. Not to say that, we didn't do our, our 20-mile hikes with full packing gear and all that kind of cool stuff, and going out to the rifle range, maintaining your skill level, going out to the field. But it was more of, okay, well, mortars kind of sit back and, wait for our call to engage the enemy. And so there was some training, but it wasn't what I was truly expecting.
Yeah. And then, what about your transition getting out? Did it come as a surprise? Were you preparing long in advance for it, or did it just happen?
I'll go with the latter. It kind of just happened, and so there were some circumstances around it that I'm not going to go into quite some detail, but it was like, okay, I always say that the DD2, 14 was in one hand, car keys were in the other, and I drove off base, and that was really the exit that I hear, talking to, veterans these days or going back in time a bit. There wasn't any stuff that is, available now, such as transition assistance programs or any kind of conversations that say, okay, well, you're going back into the civilian world. We need to prep you for that. And so again, way back in the day, 80s, early 90s, and none of these things existed. So you're going from this very regimented kind of hierarchical, state of mind into a more civilian world. I had trouble finding a job, didn't know what I wanted to do, didn't know how to do what I wanted to do. And so I really floundered for about a year. I always say my first job after the Corps was selling ice cream out of an ice cream truck. And that's literally what I did for 6 months until a friend of mine said, man, you should probably get in college. And so that's what I did. I actually signed up and went to East Carolina University after a bit.
Yeah. And then, so just walk us down that road of what happened after college. What was your experience at school?
The the academic experience was, it didn't fit in. I didn't feel like I fitted in anyway. Traditional students come right out of high school. So, 18, 19, 20 years old, you're transitioning out of high school, still having that academic mindset that, okay, I'm here, well, mostly anyway, I'm here to learn and I want to get a job. I had been out of, the academic setting for some time and had lost the ability to take tests and think in that way because I hadn't been in school. I literally hadn't been in a classroom, hadn't
Mhm.
been in too many of those things. And so I always say I failed. I failed the placement test, the math placement, the writing or English placement. And so I had to take remedial courses, quite literally, to kind of get my academic career going. And my first semester, was, in terms of GPA, was not the greatest. So it was about a two, on a scale of 0 to
Mhm.
4.0, um, which wasn't really what I knew me to be because I was really pretty good in high school. A B student. And so I had to really switch that whole mindset and say, okay, you need to hunker down. You need to figure this out. I eventually did. I got my GPA up, but it wasn't easy. Fitting in was never ever easy. And um, for the most part, didn't even know how to kind of do the whole classroom thing. You actually have to be responsible, read the textbook, take notes.
Mhm.
These are things that I literally had to learn in order to be successful in the classroom. And it didn't come easy.
Back talk with Marine veteran Dr. Keith McNally. So school didn't really go well for you in the beginning, but ultimately you turned that around at some point because you ended up actually eventually getting a doctorate degree.
I did. I did. I hunkered down. I focused on what I needed to do. And it was a shame. I look back and I say, I really wish I had those mentors, those people who could kind of guide the experience, especially both in career and in school. I didn't have that. I didn't even know where to find it. And, we're still talking, early 90s, going through the 90s. So I did what seemed logical for me, and that's kind of get in and out of college as fast as I could. And
Hmm.
like I said, I've already failed the math placement test, so it didn't look like I was going to get into any, um, you know, hardcore, math or sciences. So I took, I don't want to say necessarily the easy way out, but I became a social worker because I didn't have to focus on math and science to become a social worker. So that's what I did. Did it in 4 years, got my degree, went back for a year of graduate studies, but found the whole idea of, uh, policing the mental health population, and it's kind of a tough term, but it's kind of really what we do. If you're not necessarily a therapist trying to help, navigate people through their struggles,
Hmm.
the only other job is you're kind of policing, either a social worker or a DSS worker. I wasn't really innate and kind of in touch with that experience. So I did go back for my master's in computer information systems. And from that, within 6 months after finishing that, went into my doctoral program. And so my goal was I'm really good at teaching. Once I figured out how academics worked,
Hmm.
I found that I was pretty good at teaching. And so I wanted to become a doctor. I did. So I do have my what we call my EDD, my doctorate in education.
Uh-huh.
And I have taught easily for the past 2 decades networking infrastructure, everything from cloud-based solutions to on-premise solutions, very much the beginning level courses in network administration, systems administration, what would we consider, Active Directory and such as that. And so that was, for the past 20 years has been the bulk of my professional experience. And it's actually been a lot of fun because what I have been able to do was take the knowledge and insights and give it to the younger generation who was about to step into an absolutely wonderful career for them because there are so many jobs available This is before AI kind of took over a lot of stuff. Networking, information systems, cybersecurity. So I was, spearheading those educational components to say, wow, because I've taught people who were cooks and, you know, non-IT people, and I made it so that they could understand it, what's going on, and then, give them the tools to play with. And one of my best students, he's now I'm in Virginia, he's up in Maryland, took all that training, got his, first certification, and then ran with it. He is now, a systems network lead in the company that he's in. And so over, easily six figures plus, so of course in Maryland, you and probably more than that at this point. So 200,000, a year minimum.
Hmm.
So it's those kind of, stories that you hear back from previous students to say, the things that I did, even though my career going through was a bit jagged, what I'm able to give at the back end was really helpful for many, many students.
Yeah, and so at some point so you started having some mental health problems. You eventually got into, podcasting, writing books. You're heavily involved in veteran mental health these days.
I am. And so to kind of give your audience a bit of a backstory, so it wasn't long after I left the Corps that I made my first suicide attempt. And so that was back in 1996. And just a disclaimer, I'm not going to give any details on any of those things, just the fact that I made the attempt and made four more, and my last one being in 2021, at the tail end of COVID. So I've, struggled with, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, major depressive disorder, and, suicide ideation. So that's been a bit of a thing that I've had to kind of work with, if it's okay. And I'm going to share, if it's okay with you. I am in therapy. And so for those of you men, women who are struggling with this stuff, therapy is okay. You just have to find the right match between you and the therapist, and that's okay. It's actually a strength to go in rather than being, oppressed by these thoughts and these feelings.
Hmm.
But because of that, and let me add one more thing, I had a heart attack in 2022. So as a result of my fifth suicide attempt plus my heart attack, I made some significant life changes: exercise, diet, mindset shifts, all those kind of things. I'm into meditation. Uh, you keep on mentioning walking the path. I did write a book called Walking the Path: A Leader's Journey, and that's about uh, creating those mindset shifts. Now, that's both narrative and contextual, meaning that I walk us through a basic fable, a story about a young man who finds his way in life. And then from that, talk about how by doing that, he's able to connect with himself, with other people, and really create this space for other people to really experience life in a new way. Um, in my reality, I plan to hike the Appalachian Trail, what's called a through hike. And so from Springer Mountain, Georgia, all the way to Cottonton, Maine, I want to be this, at the very least, a motivation for other Marines or, other veterans really, who do struggle with identity, value, purpose. Get out there. I
Yeah.
chose to get out there, and I chose to make something of my life, because if the Grim Reaper is going to take me, I sure as heck am going to hike that trail before he takes me out.
Are you planning on doing it all at once? Because I know some people like, do part of it one summer and then come back and start back up where they left off. That's a long ways to do it all at once, of course.
To categorize it as a through hike, it has to be done in a 12-month window.
Oh,
So
yeah.
not necessarily a calendar year, but a 12-month window. And the further north you get, like up in Maine, Connecticut, those areas, they do close the trail, I think late October, early November. So
Hmm.
you could kind of pick up in the spring, but as long as it's in with a 12-month window. My plan was to, initially it was in 2025, to do an April, May, June, July hike, so 4 months. think I could do it in 4 months,
Mhm.
um, at 20 miles a day. Hurricane Helene kind of knocked out the high country,
Oh yeah.
this year. So 2024 is the time of this recording. So out of respect for, and I know some people who live out there. Now, not the entire area was devastated, but uh, significant portions, including the Appalachian Trail, the Blue Ridge Parkway, and I-40, and businesses and people's homes. So out of respect for that area, even though it's just a small part of the area, I'm going to start in the South. I live in Virginia, and make it all the way through. So right now, my intention is to do it in 2026, as long as no future hurricane takes out any part of the Appalachian Trail between now and then.
Yeah. So we talk about your the book you have, Walking the Path.
Walking the path, a leader's journey. Real quick, for those who are watching,
Yeah.
so that's what it looks like. Of
Awesome.
course, you could just see, catch it on Amazon. It's I wrote it. It published in 2022, so I actually spent most of 2022 kind of working through the story elements. Initially, it was going to be a leadership training guide with a colleague of mine. We were going to co-author a book. He kind of pulled out, and so I kind of took my piece, added more pieces to the puzzle, and created this narrative. And so it literally it says "Walking the Path." It is about this fictional character named John who wants to leave this very enclosed community that he has called home all of his life. And so at 18 years old, he decides to hike up and over the mountain range that, puts his village in a secluded area. And
Hmm.
by doing so, never having done it before, uh, with the support of some of his close friends, he's learned some leadership skills, and he's also learned to kind of tap into his inside energies and say, I can do this, and with the help of others, I can do it as well, which is really my mental health journey. If you kind of want to put that in a metaphorical perspective, was that with the help of other people, kind of, being by my side and being encouraging, I have been able to kind of grow, and since then have hosted many different type of podcasts, including Travel Transformation, which I mentioned earlier. But I also have several other different types of podcasts. I call them conversations because that's really what they are. They're not like in these, I don't have millions of views, but I consider every conversation important.
Absolutely. And so do you have a couple different podcasts, don't you?
I have seven.
Seven? Oh my
That's why I call them conversations, because it started with the question guy, because at the tail end of COVID, the world was turned upside down and people were trying to navigate through it. And I wanted to find out who was being successful and who was not. And so those people who were navigating COVID successfully, I recorded those conversations. Right now, I've recorded over 200 of those conversations in 3 years. Many people took what they learned and became coaches or authors or speakers, and I created Coaches Corner. So Coaches Corner talks about their professional expertise and how they're able to help other people. The Envision Speaker Series is a panel member discussion on social change. And so whether it's work-related stress or inclusion or mental health issues, I recently did an on-premise live stream. So there's people in the audience at a church in North Carolina.
God.
I do a lot of I'm an advocate for mental health reform, in the way that I can. Uh, so we did what was called Ignite the Spark. So my colleagues and I kind of got together, did this live event in North Carolina, and it was live streamed on Facebook. And so I had 7 people on the panel. I always have conversations around suicide as often as I can. So that's a specific playlist. I do talk about men's mental health in Conversations with Mitch Gray. That's a weekly live stream on my YouTube channel. Trail to Transformation, which is for veterans by veterans. And then finally, The Sacred Divine, which is a conversation around spiritual matters and spiritual transformation. And that's what a colleague oversees. So, like I said, every conversation is important.
In regards to specific veteran mental health, you get a number of things like you stay here breaking the mental health stigma for veterans and finding purpose beyond service. the power of storytelling and healing. So, walk us through some of the things you've learned and experienced, not only just from your own experience, but working with other veterans on the what's going on with the scene and mental veteran mental health these days.
The biggest thing that I think I and every veteran needs to learn, know, and appreciate is you're never going to be alone, no matter how much you feel like you are alone. That's always the first struggle is that I'm going through something and I'm doing it all by myself because we're scared. The stigma of mental health is probably never going to go away, and that's really a shame. And specifically for veterans, service members, and their families, because there's the stigma that you are above all of that. You know, we train you to be tough, rough, keep it inside. That tears down a person faster than anything else. And so, even if you don't go to therapy, there are organizations out there. And I've just met somebody who is the president or the CEO of what's it called? Bonfire Warrior Program. So he takes these, veterans out on like overnight or 2 night camping trips. And so you
Mm-hmm.
might want to put that in the show notes to this.
All right.
It's not, I'm not necessarily, related to what they're doing, but it's really good that when people kind of go out and you remove yourself from the daily stressors and you're able to talk with, yeah, when we're able to talk with each other and say, this happened and I didn't know how to deal with that. And a lot of it has to do with service related circumstances, whether you were in combat or not. Being on a boat or a ship or Navy is always, always a stressful time. Marines who have been, I served in when we went down to Panama, but Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran, doesn't matter. You're facing very traumatic situations. Um, it's continuous. So when you're able to kind of share those stories, and open up, it does relieve a lot of the burden. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to forsake if there really is a need, if you really have, depressive ideations coming back again
Mm-hmm.
or hallucinations, which I tend to do sometimes, there is a need for psychiatric care, including medications, just to kind of making sure that you are thinking the right way and experiencing emotions in an appropriate way without them being overly traumatic or overly stressful or potentially violent. So we have to be aware of those things.
Yeah. Have you worked with a number of veterans one on one?
I'm not a coach in that way. My focus has been specifically to bring people into the story, and that's why all of those conversations are important. Even in those conversations, like I said, I have a playlist of people who have, through circumstance, family, friend, spouse, whatever, have experienced suicide. At least half of those have been because of a veteran, whether father, spouse, or whatever, brother or sister,
Mm-hmm.
died by suicide. So it's really allowing those people to kind of share their story and heal through the story. Um, I am not a licensed coach in that respect, and nor am I a trauma therapist.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not going to kind of go in and say, this is what you should do, or this is what you shouldn't do. It's really about allowing people to express themselves, share that experience so that other people, again, and this is where the whole breakthrough comes in, know that you're not alone.
Why do you suppose storytelling seems to work so well?
Because it's the experience. Historically, stories how we teach. That's how we teach history or anything else. The human connection is by far the most important part of our health, being human. So when we come together, whether it's over, we're about to experience. Don't want to date your show, but Thanksgiving dinner. When people come together and and I have to say this, in a safe environment, so a very authentic and safe environment. And that doesn't necessarily mean a safe space, safe emotional space, people that you trust, people that aren't going to take your story and kind of share it all over the world, but are going to say, okay, I could definitely empathize. I've experienced something very similar, or even if they haven't, can say, I understand how really heart-wrenching that could have been. Some of the stories are, when people are in a combat situation and their colleague or friend, died, was shot or whatever, or lost a leg. And there is this whole sense of remorse and regret. It should have been me. I should have been the one. We see that a lot
Mm-hmm.
in veterans, especially those who have been exposed to traumatic combat situations. And when you share, it wasn't your time. It's okay. It's okay to grieve. If you feel like crying, it's okay to cry. If you don't feel like crying, don't cry. But when we verbalize those experiences, we release energy that's been bottled up for so long. And that's an important first step to healing.
Awesome. Well, hey Keith, we're getting close to the end of our time. Do want to give you the last word, so we need to find out more info on you and what you're doing. How do we? What's the best place to go to do that?
The best place to do that is LinkedIn.
Okay.
So I am always on LinkedIn, except for maybe on the weekends, Saturdays primarily. Um, Sundays, I do my 20-mile my hike on trail. So probably not the best way, but always LinkedIn. Walkingthepath.net is my excursion across the Appalachian Trail and all that that entails. On YouTube, whatever, and then just look for Dr. Keith McNally, DR, Keith McNally. So if you look for Dr. Keith McNally, if you Google me, you're gonna find me no matter what. But if you Google Keith McNally, you're gonna guy that owns that restaurant stuff up in New York. So you got to put the DR. And if you put the DR, you're gonna see my bald head and everywhere I'm at.
All right. Well, and if you got any advice for anybody on the way out of the military, regardless of what path they choose, whether it be entrepreneurship or the job route, what kind of advice comes to mind?
That is a trick question. And so I say that to say, unless you're like got millions of dollars in your pocket and you want to step into an entrepreneurial adventure, go for it. Otherwise, there are lots of good programs out there that kind of step you into a job.
Mm-hmm.
But and man, we just interviewed him on Trail to Transformation. His name is Howie, and I can't get his last name. I'll probably have to give you that in an email. There are some really good programs out there that kind of, what I'm trying to say is that first 12 months post service is the most critical. If you don't have the right help, guidance, and support to kind of get you through finding a job, finding housing, helping you transition, learning how to be a civilian again, the rate of suicide increases dramatically. So those first 12 months are important. Find a friend, a mentor, supports. That's what's going to cause you to be successful all the way through the rest of your life.
Sage advice. All right, Dr. Keith, appreciate you being here and sharing your story with us. And these two Marines are Oscar Mike.
Appreciate it. Thank you.